Well, it's great to
Cool.
meet you. Thank you for taking a minute out today. I appreciate it.
Yeah, for sure. I'm excited to talk with you.
Me too. So before we get into your work as a coach and all of these good things that you're doing for people, I want to begin with 4 years ago, and you had kind of mentioned COVID. It began, we didn't know how long it was going to last, the residual effects. How did you make it through that time period, and how did it change you now that we're kind of in this quote unquote post-pandemic era of our lives?
I'll answer it just personally, and then I'll talk about kind of what I think about for the general human population. I
Sure.
think for me, it really clarified a need for community. It
Hmm.
really highlighted how far we've come from living like tribally and living in these tight knit places where we really had support networks.
Hmm.
And I think for me, it's really kind of spurred this investigation of how to create that in the modern world. And, we'll get into the nervous system and that kind of stuff, but community and a sense of a support network is actually like one of the most restorative, satisfying things for our nervous system. So I think coming out of the pandemic, the general public is still kind of shell shocked, having suffered through a lot of isolation, having put a big pause on their life. I think we're a society that's really on the go, and having been so still, like the dust settled a
Yeah.
bit and a lot of things came into question, like, is this the right relationship for me? Is this the right job for me? Is
Yeah.
this the right city for me? And so you had this moment where there was a lack of connection and support in combination with like a real upheaval of
Yeah.
personal life.
Yeah.
And so I think we're still recovering from that and kind of
Yeah.
like trying to find our footing again and say, now that I'm coming out of my cave, like, where do I want to go and what do I
Right.
want to do? And how do I like rebuild myself so I can achieve that vision? But I think it's a resourcing time for us sort of collectively.
Yeah, there was someone recently that said when you're in the peanut butter jar, you can't see the label. And I think we're so close to this whole pandemic that the boom mic and the camera has to come back more and more. I don't think we're at that place where we are at a macro level to say this is what happened. We're still so close to it. But it's weird because when I think about like movies like Back to the Future, you know, when they were kind of trying to figure out what technology was going to be like in the future, we are so connected technologically, but the irony is that even though we were all connected technically, the community was the part of it, the actual palpitation. So like when I'm doing like jazz radio is my other thing, if you don't have that room to go to actually see and intermingle with all those musical notes getting thrown into the ether, it's really hard for you to feel connected to humanity and all of that, and we needed it so bad.
Yes. Yeah. And I think we're slowly starting to realize that some of the ways we've organized social connection might not actually be paying the dividends that we hoped it
Yeah.
would, and that the internet is wonderful for certain things, and the AI is wonderful for certain things, and also it has its limitations. And so
Yeah.
I think you're right. Like we're still sort of in the peanut butter, going like, okay, how do I squeak myself out to
Uh,
get a vantage point on like what's actually going to work for us? Even though it's
Absolutely.
yummy in here, is it
Uh-huh.
really a balanced diet,
Yeah,
right?
for sure. For sure. So
Yeah,
let's get to the heart and soul of what you do for a living here in 2024. I'm going to put
sure.
you in front of a bunch of third graders. It's career day. And one of the kids is like, hey, what do you do for a living? How do you answer that child?
I help people live more of the life that they want to live.
Okay.
So, understanding like we all want to feel certain things or do certain things or be certain ways. And sometimes that feels really hard and we don't know why. And we don't have the tools or the things that we need to make the changes that we want. And there's this like sort of secret lock and key, which is called the nervous system. And
Mhm.
it's kind of like the train operator. If you think about like a big train, it's kind of like our invisible conductor that we don't see, but is actually driving the train all the time. And so if we can make friends with him and learn how the train works and start to have some chances to drive ourselves, then we have a better chance of getting to the places we want to go, right? Like if
Yeah.
we're driving in a train and we don't know how to drive a train, it's really hard to get to Hawaii, or I
Yeah.
guess we can't get to Hawaii on a train, but to Kansas City,
Sure.
right? So that's kind of what I do, is help people understand like how to drive their own train.
So before we get to the alpha point of how we arrived at this point, I want to know when you were in the third grade, what was your dream? What did you want to be when you grew up?
I was going to be a doctor and a mayor. I
Okay.
wanted to be both. I was like, I knew from 5 years old, like we have a video of me in kindergarten, talking about how I can't wait to go to medical school. My dad was a surgeon. And I think what I knew was that I wanted to help make the world a better place.
Yeah.
And that was like what I knew the way to do it, because my dad was so loved by everyone in our community and had helped people. So I was pretty set. I was like Dr. Quinn medicine woman for like
Huh?
all of my friends,
Do,
starting at like 7.
do you, I just, that just sparked a memory. There was a movie Michael J. Fox was in where he went to a small town and he was a doctor and he
Oh
got,
yes.
I can't remember the name of that, but they wanted him to run for political office. That would be the perfect setup for that.
You know what? If I could have like plopped myself into that movie, like that
Yeah.
would have been for me totally. I think I just like wanted to make things better. I had like such a strong drive. I was in politics for a while before I got into therapy and coaching. But it was just this like drive to help
Yeah.
things change. Yeah.
But politics has gotten to be so clowny in this country. Like we've gotten to a point where it is passionate because I've been passionate about politics until all of this started happening. But there was a time where even the candidates I didn't like seem so passe now. It's like what it was no big deal. Like even with McCain and Obama and the stakes that were going on, it's like they were civil. They would defend each other. Like what happened? We know what happened, but it's like at the same time, do you miss it? Do you feel like the exit maybe out of it was welcome, or do you miss it at all?
I don't miss it at all.
Okay.
Yeah, I worked at a very large policy organization that was partnered with the Obama administration, like
Mhm.
early on in that tenure. And it was really exciting at the time. And then I very quickly realized that I was staring at a computer all day, every day, like
Yeah.
stuck in a cubicle. And it was pretty soul crushing for me. I just need like a different life.
Yeah.
But I feel grateful for that time, having gotten to just see how things worked
Yeah.
and like be part of a larger mission. But it clarified for me that working one on one was really where the juice was for me. And so I feel, yeah, very satisfied, I think, with where things have gone. But it was shiny and
Yeah.
fun for
Yeah.
the moment. But he was like our biggest celebrity of all time. So,
I'm telling you,
know.
and that was such a magnanimous grassroots effort. I mean, no one saw it coming. It was after Iowa and it just steamrolled. I worked with the guy for a little while. His name was Dan Beckman, and I did some work here in town. I used to do some correspondence work for a station called Current TV. Al Gore set it up in '08. Wait, was it '08? It was right after the election. Anyway, he set it up and they would have correspondents in regions around the country. So he would tap me. He was working for the Obama campaign. And I just remember how that tidal wave just all of a sudden overnight, it was the wave that everybody wanted to surf. But before
Yeah,
that, it was just this ideological notion, like with Bernie, like it would be great, but can we bring a black
totally.
man to prominence? Like, and then it was
Yeah.
there. Then all of a sudden it was in front of our faces. So
Yeah, and
it's
I think he really made politics cool in a way,
uh-huh.
like for us, and
Yeah.
it was like there was a magnetism to being involved at that
Yeah.
time. I actually remember current TV. It was kind of a
It was
cool
fun.
offering.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
then it got,
yeah,
I think it just kind of turned into I think Al Jazeera or one of those stations ended up buying it out. But anyways, it was a good social experiment as long as it lasted. It was fun,
yeah.
good people. So let me
Totally.
ask you this. Tell me how you got to the point of where you're at today. What seeds were planted into you that grew into who you are and the work that you do today?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I was misdiagnosed when I was really young with ADHD and put on like Adderall at like age 7. And it really affected my body. I was on it for like 14 years before I like took myself off of it in my 20s. But it created like a lot of systemic anxiety for me. And so I was really on the hunt to understand like how do we heal from this? Like almost everybody has anxiety that is unmanageable these days, right? Like anxiety is a healthy thing. We want anxiety, otherwise we die, right? It's what
Yeah.
tells us like don't jump off the cliff, don't keep your
Yeah.
hand on the stove. So we need some anxiety, but the levels of anxiety that we have now are so far beyond like what is sort of healthy and balanced for a human system.
Sure.
And so as I started, I was in politics, and then there were a series of kind of wild universal events. Like I was in South Africa, and a shaman like pulled me out of a tourist group and was like, you need to be a healer, and like you're having all these dreams and I can see them. And she was right. She like I was having all these
Oh.
dreams that she like described. And that was just one of like 3 or 4 incidences where I was sort of called to be in healing in some way. And so
Hmm.
I took this curiosity of like how do we heal anxiety and this called to be a healer, and I started studying somatics, which is body-based psychotherapy, and
Yeah.
it really is rooted in neurobiology. So I learned a lot about how the body worked, but I wasn't really getting better. Like I
Yeah.
ended up with adrenal fatigue in my early 30s, and I kind of was that like typical case, like had everything like a great job, great house, good friends, like awesome partner, but I was miserable
Hmm.
and ended up needing to kind of like take a pretty big turn away to say, like, what is actually going on? And I encountered some incredible mentors who helped me understand the true nature of anxiety, which is really just systemic inflammation caused by the nervous system having a setting or two that is off.
Yeah.
Um, so I just became like kind of obsessed with understanding how to heal. And at the same time, I was running like a very full private practice in Seattle with some of like the most traumatized people that you could find.
Wow.
People who had experienced a lot of like early abuse and things that were really, really hard. And so I learned a lot about how do you heal, and had some really amazing success early on in my career and got partnered with some doctors. And we just did some amazing work together. Learning about healing and like
Yeah.
what it takes. And so things kind of rolled from there. And then over the years, I got more and more effective and more efficient. I got into psychedelics, I got into like consciousness work. And now I see kind of the opposite of who I saw originally, which is like executives, like high level CEOs and founders and people who are kind of at the highest end of functioning in our society, but still get caught with very similar things because no
Yeah.
one's teaching about the nervous system in business school, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
um, so I've kind of taken everything I've learned over the last 10 to 15 years and applied it to our leadership, and how do we lead from a place of being balanced and clear and connected to ourselves. So that's kind of the
Yeah.
general arc.
That's interesting. It's fascinating. And so I'm curious on this quest that you've been on, who's been a hero for you? Who's been an inspiration?
There's a couple of people. One is a man named David Hanscom, and he created a program called Direct Your Own Care. And he was a spine surgeon who was just like recognizing that all the surgeries were going really bad, and people were having all these spinal surgeries that they didn't need because it was actually a systemic inflammation and nervous system issue. And he changed my life. We were actually good friends, and he was one of my mentors in Seattle. And he just helped me understand the neurobiological process of change. And he also encouraged me to change my life in ways that I'm still extremely grateful for.
Yeah.
And there was a man named Bill Bowen. He's not alive anymore. I sort of described him as like grandfather Yoda. But he created something called psychophysical therapy, and he really helped us as a field understand the connection between the mind and the body and how to work with it
Yeah.
actually in one-on-one spaces with people.
Yeah.
So I think the both of them are, but also like my parents and
Sure.
just their support of being like, you can do anything. And so I think
Uh-huh.
I believe that's why I wanted to be the mayor, and
Yeah.
I'm like
That's
still
it.
taking
That's it.
that confidence,
Yeah.
out into the world to be like, I can help you change your life.
Hmm.
I think, yeah. So I would say those
Yeah.
folks.
That's huge. So let me ask you this. If you could meet one person alive on the planet right now that you find fascinating and spend some time with them, who would that be?
Oh, that's a good question. Um, hmm. I feel like I've met like all the wonderful people who are in my life, but I I have like there's a scientist named Robert Sapolsky,
Uh-huh.
and he wrote Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers, and he recently wrote a book called Determined,
Yeah.
and he used to be this like mega hero for me, and now recently his research suggests that there's like no free will if we look simply like from a neurobiological perspective. And I've listened to so many interviews with him, but I'm still confused, and so I think I'd want to have dinner to be like,
Yeah.
how can this be true, Robert? Like help me reconcile this,
Yeah.
because he's such a genius, but the research is so hard to swallow. And so I think I would want to sit down with him and like have a better understanding of, how that works. Who would you want to have dinner with?
Oh man, I would love to meet Obama. I mean, I'd love to meet Obama or Clinton.
Oh, okay.
I think
Uh-huh.
it would be so much
Oh,
fun to
yeah,
be
yeah.
around them. Um, but I think that's fascinating. And it's so there was a guy, people get really upset when they say animals don't have free will or there's no heaven. And there was a noted researcher, and I can't remember his name, that says that when animals, dogs, cats die, that's the end of it. And he just infuriates people, but it's along what you're talking about, this level of free
Yeah.
will that animals may not have. And I think exploring that is very fascinating. And
Yeah.
but it really upsets humans to think that that's the end of it, especially for animals, because we're so connected to them. So I think that would be very interesting to
Yeah.
to have a discussion along those lines.
Yeah, and
You
I,
know?
I think it's also the entry point in some ways for this work, which is to say, when we're not working with our nervous system, right, which actually determines about 98% of our daily behaviors, thoughts, perceptions,
Yeah.
I can see what he's talking about,
Yeah.
that we don't have a lot of free will, that it's all kind of like genetics and default mode networks and whatever. But
Yeah.
I think there is also a space to say we actually can influence our physiology.
Yeah.
And that's the interesting space for me, which is how do we work with our bodies um, to change our setting so that we don't have to micromanage
Yeah.
or try to control all of those other things.
Yeah. It's interesting because I see with my son, he does things where it's like there's no way that I told him to do that. There's no way that he's doing that other than he was just born into doing that. And then it's like what
Yes.
your parents did. He's on the spectrum. He's 19, he's on the autism spectrum. I've
Uh,
always told him whatever you want to do, you can do whatever you want to do. And there is
mm,
that aspect of it too, which shapes and modifies any kind of predetermined DNA woven thing that's in you. It really does
yeah.
influence how you live your life.
100%. I mean, it's like you can really see it with siblings, right? It's like you've
Hmm.
both grown up in the same home,
Uh-huh.
and yet you have these like totally different
Uh-huh.
expressions of self, and so. But I also think there are ways in which we can access like that higher, the connection to something greater, and
Yeah.
harness like some choice. So I'm not fully bought into the we have no free will
Yeah.
camp, although I think it's an important the research is important
Yeah,
to understand. So,
for sure.
yeah.
So what's your motivation to do the work that you do? You obviously, because you're giving a lot of yourself to help other people, but you have to evolve as a human. What is that
Yeah.
duality? What is that motivation for you?
I think in some ways it is that evolution of myself. Like, I'm not your typical therapist. Like, I'm not super wrapped up in my clients' lives. I'm not like burdened with empathic, like obsessions of making sure everyone's doing great. Like that's never been the thing. I'm not invested in saving people, but I am interested in transformation and
Yeah.
I'm interested in evolution and I believe we can do better. I think humans have gone a little bit off track and we're missing some pieces in if we want to evolve towards love instead of fear. And
Yeah.
we're not we're not making a lot of those decisions, even though I think at our nature we're a very good species. Like
Yeah.
we are altruistic, at our base, and the research really supports that, but we often end up making decisions that don't reflect that, and
Yeah.
that's always been hard for me to see. And I think my own personal quest to just like find meaning has been, this feels meaningful. It's like to connect people to their truest self. I undeniably feel satisfied by the end of my day,
Yeah.
Um, and also, I believe that there's a reason that we're here learning this. Like, there's a reason that there are these gaps, and that we have also been given the tools to learn. And so I'm always like up for a challenge, and I feel like it's like, cool, how do we take this place that we're in and where we want to go and
Mhm.
like close that gap? And so
Yeah.
that's why I think part of why I love working with leadership, because they, nowadays those people at the top of the corporations have as much power as our politicians.
Yeah.
Um, you know, and so it feels like this really exciting place just on a personal level to help these, amazing humans like feel better and do better, but also change the shape of our world, in a way that I think hopefully will make it a nicer place to be,
Yeah.
less bullying, less abuse, less pain in
Yeah.
general and suffering.
For sure. So, of all of these things that you've done and evolved into and achieved in your life, what are you the proudest of?
Honestly, my marriage.
Yeah.
We are like starting a family, and I think just have a really incredible relationship. And I think that's my primary one, to feel like, oh yeah, me of 15 or 20 years ago, just like super riddled with anxiety, would not have had such a beautiful relationship, and such a gratifying space to like feed and be fed by
Yeah.
somebody. So I think that is number one for me. But number two is the programming I've done for like groups of executives, and just seeing like a room full of CEOs dancing to rave music, like laughing and connecting and crying and like finding new parts of themselves, and then going back to their companies and changing how they run their companies or how they deal with their employees or their partners, like their founders. And that has been like so exciting
Yeah.
and feel really alive, that
Yeah.
that work.
So, at the
Yeah.
end of the day, Kendra, everyone has a perception of you. There's all these people in your life, family, friends, clients, colleagues, but you're in control. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
I think I'm a translator. Like, I think I was put on the universe in some ways to translate like abstract ideas into digestible things that we can act on and incorporate into our daily life right away. And so I think I'm kind of like a soul doctor in that way of like, let me help you get out the pieces that are, the kidney stones that are clogging up your soul pathway,
Yeah.
to help like people live in more expressed of a way. And I think it's the same thing in my own life. Like I'm a mover. I want there to be forward momentum. I like change. I like action. And so I think that, and I think I'm also just like a silly creature that like is trying to figure it out day by day too. I think when you're in the kind of role that I'm in, people often perceive that you have it all figured out. And something that's always been really important to me is to be very transparent with my clients of like, I'm in it with you, buddy. Like I don't have all the answers either. I can maybe understand what's happening for me in a different way than you can because I have this framework, but I'm still, doing everything to get on my meditation mat in the morning and not my cell phone, like
Yeah.
I still get in fights with my husband. I still like yell at someone at the grocery store who
Sure.
stole the cookies I wanted.
Yeah.
So I think it's, yeah, just being humble, but also recognizing that I kind of have been asked to do this big thing,
Yeah.
which is help people change their lives.
So I think you need to have a merch item that's a coffee cup that says Soul Doctor and it's little
Yeah.
silhouettes of all the people dancing. Okay. And it's
Totally.
like a sunrise over a butte in New Mexico. That would be so cool.
I love it. I love it. I am like a huge merch fan. This is like
Yeah.
my secret dream is to have like my own like merch store. So
Yeah.
I'm gonna put it on the list of
100%. Soul Doctor
yeah,
is such a great tagline. So good. So
totally. Yeah.
if anyone wants to reach out, hire you, learn more about what you're doing, any of the good business, where do they go?
Great. You can go to my website, Kendra-Bloom, Kendra-Bloom, .com. I'm also on Instagram at Beyond Potential You, where I share little videos of like, here's how you could engage with your nervous system today, or here's how ways you could understand yourself or what's happening in your life. Um, I think those are probably the two easiest ways to get in touch. But you're also welcome to shoot me an email, and you can find me on the internet, Kendra Bloom. So
Okay.
happy to be in touch with
Yeah,
anyone.
absolutely. And that's a perfect last name for what you're doing. It's just, everything's blooming.
I know.
So it's good.
It was
Yeah.
almost like foreshadowing in
Yeah,
some way.
exactly. Yeah, you were
Yeah,
predestined. So,
exactly.
Kendra, this is
100%.
wonderful. Great to meet you. Thank
Thanks.
you for all
Yeah.
the story and the good work you're doing. Best of luck with everything.
Thank you so much, Joe. Have a good
Yeah.
one. Great
Thank
to
you. You
talk with
too.
you today.
Take care.
Okay. Bye.
See ya. Bye.